I think that there is such an incredible opportunity right now for HR to leverage their mastery in human insights to create unparalleled resilience and innovation in the business. And I call that change HR. But what that means is they need to spend time making sure that the cobbler's son has shoes, building internal change management capabilities on their teams, within their organizations. Then they need to learn how to speak the language of the business.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burnout, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
Today, I'm super excited to have time with Brynn Shader. Brynn is the creator of ChangeCraft, a consulting and speaking platform and methodology that helps leaders turn disruption into opportunity. Amen. With 16 plus years in organizational change management, she ditches rigid frameworks for practical human-centered strategies that drive real impact. Known for her no-filter honesty and infectious energy, Brynn partners with Fortune 500 companies and growing organizations to transform change resistance into resilience. I'm guessing our audience can hear why I'm so excited to connect with you. She's also a CrossFit athlete and a long-distance swimmer. She thrives in discomfort, proving that growth comes from challenge. Whether advising executives or lighting up the stage, Brynn crafts change that sticks. So fun to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, let's jump in. So that's like obviously the brief synopsis of your amazing journey, but I'd love to hear in your words, maybe a few career highlights that you're proud of that help us see your catalytic nature.
Yeah, so the first one that comes to mind is it all started with a temp agency. So those aren't really around anymore. I think, that's kind of transitioned into contractors and staff augmentation. But I joined a woman-owned temp agency when I was out of grad school living in DC and looking for an opportunity. I was placed at a Bloomberg startup. So it was called Bloomberg Government, and it was a startup division of the Bloomberg. We all know, data, news, analytics, but it was focused on translating the business implications of government action. Now, I was placed there to be a CRM administrator for Salesforce. I'm there, I'm building their environment. I mean, I'm cleaning up messes from one of their senior executives who was recruited and had to have Salesforce. So I had taught myself Salesforce at a previous role and was doing that. And then the VP of sales comes over to me. There was maybe 10 employees at the time. And he was like, I don't know what you're doing over here, but with that energy, like, I need you in sales. We're building a sales force. This is going to be a massive, organization, which it is. And I trusted him because I respected him. And so for a while, I was doing both. I was a Salesforce administrator and I was a sales associate. And at the time, I was onboarding new sales associates, new, people who were peers, but also executives who were sales executives, for example, or even, data, like reporting executives who needed to understand how to use Salesforce to report on the sales team. And so I ended up falling in love with onboarding. And I was like, I care more and more passionate about putting structures and processes and building culture that supports the thriving of my fellow employees and leaders than I do about my clients, which I loved my clients, but it wasn't the same. So that was a wake-up call that showed me I needed to be in HR. And so fast forward, I moved across the country, packed all my stuff in a car. And this was before I interviewed at 6 different staffing agencies in 2 days. I flew from DC over to Denver, booked 3 one day, 3 the next day, and received several offers because everyone told me if you want to be in HR, you have to recruit. And so that's what I did. I ended up recruiting for a couple of years. The next catalyst highlight of my journey was when I was recruited into a small boutique staffing company, and I essentially built their IT desk. There was no IT division. They were a construction staffing company. And so that was a highlight for me because I was going out and selling staffing services. What were the staffing services? Me. And then I was filling the roles, and I had so much fun with that, but I realized that I wanted to see and be a part of the growth and development of the employees I was placing, the technical talent that I was placing. So then I said, okay, well, so my passion is not talent acquisition, it's actually in the business. So that kind of led to me going internal into HR for, I worked at CU. And the next milestone, which I'll stop there, is really, I was recruited to build and execute a leadership development program at CU. But then also they were implementing PeopleSoft. They were going from 8.9 to 9.2, which at the time was like a brand new technology. So I went out and talk about resistance. I was convincing super, super tenured HR professionals, I'm talking 20 years, to be open to, ready and willing to accept the massive changes to their role that this new technology was gonna bring. And that was when I fell in love with the intersection of people, process, and technology, and started to do change management before it was even called change management.
So many amazing takeaways there. I love your fearlessness. I love, a catalyst often described there was one boss or person in the organization who saw the value that we bring that we might not even know in ourselves, and they might not even be able to articulate it. Like you said, like, I don't know what you're doing over here, but you need to come work for me, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
But you leaned into that you kept really checking in on like what your passion was, but that you were also bringing this like intentionality of like, if I want to get into HR, the people say I have to do X. If I want to do this, I have to have the tech skills to bring it along. So thank you. And so I think it's a great pivot for you. What has been helpful in terms of, understanding what it means to be a Catalyst executive? Like, how do you relate to that concept, and how has maybe being a Catalyst supported your journey?
Yeah. So I've been a catalyst my entire life before I knew what that was, until I read the book and met you, Shannon. But I think that the way that the catalyst experience manifested for me was challenging in the beginning. It was a constant need for more. It was a constant looking or always looking around at problems, finding problems everywhere, and not being okay just sitting and letting those problems, no matter where the problem was, letting those problems continue. And when some of these roles that I've had in my life when I was internal before I went out on my own was challenging. There's structures, there's personalities, there's politics, there's people on teams who, if you try, to help solve a problem that maybe they didn't realize was there, and you do it in a way that doesn't work for them, they are not an ally. They become, an enemy is strong, but a resistor. And so I think early on, when I was, a young woman, I consider myself to be lucky. I grew up with incredible parents who put me in therapy when I was very young, so that I could understand my emotions and be able to articulate. So I feel really grateful for that. I was like more self-aware than I think most people my age, but I still struggled with what to do with this energy and how to be in an organization where I could leverage everything that I had to offer for the benefit of everyone around me. And so, I think that I made mistakes along the way. I trusted, people who I thought valued what I brought to the table, and maybe, their minds changed because they were receiving pressure from another place. But I've had leaders along the way. Like when I was at Vail Resorts and I was in HR, I was on the talent development team. I spread my wings as like a catalyst executive because I was trusted by my leader, and I flew. I went and helped with mergers and acquisitions, the cultural integration side of it, because I raised my hand and I said, they need support. who is running the people change management side of it. And of course, like Vail Resorts is an amazing well, it would, I think things have changed, you know, in the past couple of years, but I think, you know, I was able to really like be a catalyst because I had that leader, and that made all the difference for me when I was internal.
You described so well, I mean, obviously like a personal journey too, but it's the even when, because I agree, like therapy and self-awareness and all of those things, it wasn't until Tracy gave me though the, you know, the readout on the preliminary research about catalysts that I was like, oh, they don't all have the same desire for change. Like it just sounds so obvious, but to your point, it's like, you know, you could be the fly in the ointment for them because you're like, and you do it with such good intentions, but to them you're just complaining or pointing out all the things that are wrong or the things that they don't want to do or like things they don't understand. And it can be a real toll. But conversely, and for listeners, it's like if you see someone who's got catalyst potential in your organization, just giving them the sandbox and a little bit of support can have 10x, 100x dividends. It doesn't take much for us to flourish.
It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
It's a good pivot, actually. Let's pivot to the conversation about, like, you know, you talked about the intersection of the people, tech, and the processes, and given your history with that, I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of like the role that HR needs to play right now, helping their companies not just survive in this time of, like, you know, violent disruption.
Yeah. Oh, so it's so HR is so interesting. Like I volunteered at one of the national SHRM conferences recently, and I just get overwhelmed by the love that these people have for people. Not all of them, you know, it's not always, you know, it's not always going to be that way, but there is no other function in an organization that exists for the benefit of the people. In a lot of the talks that I give, I give like a brief history of HR. I give like a 2-minute history of HR. And I think that, you know, we started off as welfare managers. We were making sure that people weren't getting limbs cut off in factories, and that children, you know, were being protected from child labor. And then, you know, there was the civil rights movement and Equal Pay Act, and we were doing, you know, this protection, but then now we had to protect the organization from not a machine or like, you know, something physical, but regulations, this intangible thing. And we became protectors in another way. And so I think that for the evolution of HR until recently, the function has been underutilized is not even the word. They have been transactional and protectors of risk for the organization. However, the people who end up in HR are people who care about other people. They have unbelievable untapped skills that really could benefit the organization, but we need to get them there. HR needs to get themselves there. And then they need to partner with the organization to create this new paradigm and to you know, it's like change management 101. You know, one of the key skills of change management is that you have to sell an idea. And that doesn't mean manipulating. That means spending time to find out with them what is in it for them. What is in it for them? What is the benefit? And so I think that, you know, this evolution of HR and the journey and what I talk about in front of, you know, HR audiences is that we are in an unprecedented time. And you know, in your book, you guys talk about VUCA. And when I'm speaking, I also talk about Bonnie, which is it was a new framework in COVID because VUCA doesn't even explain it anymore, especially with AI. Bonnie explains this new level of ambiguity, brittleness that is like calling us to operate at a different level. And HR can be the guide. But first, they need to build agility within their own teams, right? And that is not what they're used to. They're not, I mean, you talk about agility and experimentation with teams, compliance teams or payroll teams, they're like, what? You're out of your mind. But there is always space for experimentation and to bring agile ways of working into HR. There's also, change management capabilities like, storytelling, visual storytelling, communicating, aligning leaders. And I think some of these capabilities they already have, especially if it's a large HR organization and they have like talent management and they have like these other groups who are really have different skill sets than payroll. Like my previous client had payroll under finance, and I think that actually makes more sense because the skill set and the desires are different. But so if I could talk about this forever, but I don't want to bore users and our audience, and I want to answer the question. I think that there is such an incredible opportunity right now for HR to leverage their mastery in human insights to create unparalleled resilience and innovation in the business. And I call that change HR. But what that means is they need to spend time making sure that the cobbler's son has shoes, building internal change management capabilities on their teams within their organizations. Then they need to learn how to speak the language of the business. And that is one of, I think, a big gap in many, many HR organizations. You ask an HR executive or an HR, director what the business does to how they make money or what are their strategic goals. HR needs to know that. They need to be able to speak in numbers. They need to be able to translate two-way the needs of their executives into the people needs so that they can showcase their value, which is so there, it's just untapped, and bring elevate their people to an entirely different level.
So, what advice do you have for HR leaders who may not be catalysts themselves to think about the role that either existing catalysts in their organization have or the need for bringing in some catalysts into the HR organization to help with all the disruption, the positive disruption, the experimentation, the agility building that you're talking about?
Yeah, I would say, so there's two things that come to mind. The first thing is to do, a talent audit, whatever, an assessment of the existing people that they have in HR, that they have on their teams, that they have in the department, and seek out these characteristics and see like who bubbles up to the top. The first thing that comes to mind that is like really comfortable language for HR is high performers, right? But a high performer isn't necessarily a catalyst. A catalyst, I think, is someone who wants to make change. And they have these, I read through these 5 or like characteristics, or you call them catalyst traits, like an inherent drive toward action, constant possibility and clear visions, subconscious data collection. Like they're always looking for the problems and data to support any potential solutions. And this 4th one, though, I think is really, really critical right now in this unprecedented time of change, this experimentation mindset. And I talk about this all the time, agility, 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 agility. But what is agility? What's the difference between agility and adaptability? And so I think, I would say that identifying these potential catalysts, like individuals on the team who have catalytic, how do you say that?
Catalytic
Characteristics, and have conversations with them about their goals, their career goals, their values, their passions, their motivations. Hopefully, those conversations are already happening. And if they're not, then those are really important. Find that group, create some kind of like a catalyst agent network, bring them together because they are the most powerful when they are together and they can feed off of each other. And then I would say the second thing is based on that assessment and that audit, what are the goals? Like what, right? We can't, if we're in the middle of the ocean and we don't know our final destination, we'll end up, in China versus if we're trying to go to Panama. So I think, having this vision and knowing where HR as a function wants to go.
That's right.
And where these capabilities and these catalysts can actually enable those goals, but also, right, don't stop at HR's strategic goals. They have to tie and enable the organization's goals.
100%, totally. And I mean, I think it's interesting, like we talk about high potential because it is like one of the easiest ways to help people connect the dots. But the way that I describe the difference now is, and it's a little bit cynical, I'll own that, but historically high potential programs have looked and been able to identify people who crush their KPIs, their objectives, their goals, and manage up really well. And the challenge with catalysts is we're often intentionally flying below the radar. We're working on things, especially if we don't have the training or skills to do what you just talked about. We're working on the net new areas that might not have a business sponsor yet because nobody's even identified the problem. Even as we're making the impact, there might have been no baseline data because nobody was paying attention to that thing. And so I think, and the other thing that they're bringing, which you ended on, is like the problem solving and the agility. It's like you give a little bit of skills and you give a little bit of direction to catalysts, you connect them across the network and they're freaking unstoppable. Yeah. I would love to pivot now because we could have a whole nother conversation on the intersection of HR and
oh yeah.
But a lot of our customers today, given the sort of continuing breakneck sort of speed of change and the intensity of disruption that's almost impossible to communicate, they're like, so what is the role of change management? How is change management changing, and what do we need to pay attention to?
Yeah. So change management, I think the first, and it's, I gave a talk once called "What the fuck is change management anyway?" And I literally applied, I submitted that talk title. I did not think they were going to go for it. It was with HR, Disrupt HR, which is like this massive, national organization. I was very surprised, but it showed me that people don't know what change management is. Some people, and that's okay. It's not like a bad thing. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's an opportunity to learn and to create some new understandings of how people respond to change. How do you manage fear and anxiety? And how do you bring people along in a journey so that you are maintaining productivity during the disruption as much as possible, and you're retaining your top talent? And you're retaining your catalyst. And so I think that, the first thing is differentiating the difference between project management and change management. Everyone knows what project management is, right? We know this triangle, the scope, the timeline, the budget. Great. These are all finite. These are tangible things. Of course, we know what project management is. But change management is the people side of that. And it is ambiguous and it is messy because people are emotional, and it's not super easy to bucket them or put them on an Excel spreadsheet. But your project could have the most defined scope, the most incredible timeline, a budget that will never end. But if you don't enable the people side of whatever that project is going to disrupt, when it is executed, you will not realize the business value that is being invested in that project. There's also so that's more of like the risk, like if you don't focus on change management, if you don't focus on bringing people along, communications, ensuring that they are skilled up before the change goes live, you're also missing out on opportunity. You're missing out on an opportunity to elevate your culture, because when people feel like they are part of the change, when I sit down and show my clients what a stakeholder interview looks like, they see that it's not just about gathering data from these stakeholders. That is a byproduct. That is the benefit. We need to understand what they need and what they care about. But it is bringing them into the conversation. It is that connection. It is that, I don't like the term buy-in because it feels manipulative. It is that co-creation that creates an army of people who now feel invested in. They now feel like change isn't happening to them, that they are part of it. Now, I know that this can't, like, you can't have this elaborate change management effort with these months of stakeholder interviews and change impact analysis for every change, because like the business impact doesn't warrant that. But that's where being agile and being able to right size those conversations and right size those streams of work will enable whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so the second thing is building courage amongst amongst leaders and employees. When you are doing change right, and you are addressing the people side, and you are soliciting their feedback, and you are understanding the specific impacts this change is going to have on the process, like, a new tool, how is that actually going to change the way they do their jobs? A lot, most of the time, a lot. But when you approach this correctly and the right amount of time is invested before the on button is switched on, you are building courage amongst your population, because now they feel they can connect with some confidence, and their entire sense of identity at work and their sense of stability and predictability has started to be mended a bit. Then you create an unbelievably powerful organization.
I love that last point so much. Their sense of predictability is mended. I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that, but let me share some of my thoughts about that, which is there's so much change coming at everyone all the time. Even for Catalyst, change fatigue is real. And yes, if we're doing it right now, we're not going to have a 3, 5, 10-year strategy. We're going to have an adaptive strategy where we're sensing and we're informing it, which means almost by definition, people that were hooking their sense of stability onto what historically have been reasonable places to hang your sense of stability, which is like, hey, here's how I'm contributing to the 3-year strategy. I know what I need to do for the next 3 years, et cetera. What I heard you say is the more transparent that we can be about this constant change worlds that the organization is going to be living in, the more that we can involve people in the co-creation, and so that they can see where their role is tying into what is now the change management strategy in a way, right? As opposed to like static strategy.
Yes.
And what we're saying to them is, look, it might be something like, look, the thing that we're asking for you now is, yes, you need to deliver this in the next couple of quarters, but be sensing for, or be ready for these other noise signals that are going to come through the noise that we're going to invite you to bring to us and to adapt. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this idea of a sense of predictability, that's really hard, right? To maintain. And I think that the more that leaders can communicate and be transparent, as you said, to the instability that exists in the very nature of the way we have to run our businesses today, that creates a sense of stability unto itself, right? Like, I can rely, you're telling me, you're painting a picture that I can now see myself in.
That's right.
And so it's like setting expectations that is not constantly causing an amygdala hijack in our employees, that allows them to somehow, like a cat kind of like creating their own little like comfortable bed out of like a blanket. They're finding their spot in the chaos.
I love that analogy so much. One more question on this one, and then we'll pivot to our last question. you also hit on a super important point, which is for all of the changes, we're not going to have these big change management processes or these efforts or the stakeholder interviews or stuff like that. I'm wondering if you have guidance for people about when they know to apply that methodology or when they're just like, we're going to just have to adapt kind of in the seams.
Oh yeah. Love that question. I think that always asking that question when you have like a gut sense that something is changing and people are going to be fill in the blank about it, it doesn't matter what the emotion is, happy, sad, scared. If you have this gut reaction, that requires a little bit of time to assess what that impact might be and to t-shirt size the change, right? Is it are you changing the expense policy, which like my current client is doing? Okay, so put yourself in the shoe, and this also requires empathy on behalf of, right, the leaders and the people who are like talking about the change. You have to put yourself in the shoes of people in different parts of the business to say, okay, if I am, and this is where I use personas and journey mapping, when it is a large or extra large, right, impact, is you really then need to understand the individual unique felt experience of these different groups of people. But I think, doing an assessment, and this is something that I tell all of my clients, and oftentimes I'm brought into like what I call rescue and recovery because they didn't do this. And that's okay. We all learn in our own ways. Like they learn about change management from pain. I think a lot of us learn how to do things differently when we feel pain. I think that's part of the human experience. But if we can get ahead of it and do some of this assessment and have some of these initial conversations, for example, like talk to someone in a part of the business who you think this new expense policy is going to completely like throw them off. Have an initial conversation. These don't have to be like formal, I'm having a stakeholder interview with you. It's just like have a conversation, find out what their current process is, what it's suggest some of the changes that might be coming and hear what their reaction is. And you can use that as data. This data collection part of change management is so often skipped, but it is so critical to everything and to maximize the value of whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so I would say initial conversations, informal conversations, get a pulse, get a temperature, right? Take a temperature and think about what communications are going to be required to bring them along and ensure that you've got two-way communications, right? Because it can't just be one way. And then the other two pieces are who are the key leaders who are going to own this and be the face of it? And are you creating safe spaces for them to be able to experience the change themselves? And then the last piece is what are they learning? Like what do people need to learn? And addressing that.
Amazing. And you basically, I just have to say, articulated both the class and our Catalyst programs. Like those are the things that we help Catalyst understand. And so we're like, it's not a change. What we teach is not like an official change management process. It's the skills to execute on all of those things that we talk about, like having a listening tour first. Like what is just generally the appetite for change around this? And then you're like, in that, you've identified the resistors, the endorsers, the key stakeholders. And then you're like, okay, let's co-create with the people who are going to help us get the flywheel going.
Yep.
And then on the final side, it's like, okay, but we still have to bring the rest of the org. So we get a feedback. Like, are there any other major red flags?
Yes.
Otherwise, we're going ahead, right? So I love that so much. All right, fun.
Well, and this is also why I don't call it change management. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I don't like to call it change management because I don't think you can actually manage change. Surprise! I call it ChangeCraft because you're crafting experiences and exactly what you guys are doing. And I think that that's super smart that you're not calling it change management because that can feel really overwhelming and scary. But essentially what you're doing are those things which are not rocket science. It's just takes a little bit of upskilling and experimenting.
And a little bit of slowing down, which can be really, really hard for us as Catalysts. I have to bring my stakeholders along again. I have to communicate for the 10th time so that they understand.
Yes.
Oh, awful.
Yes, people need to hear things 10 times and they need to feel important.
Totally.
And when you're telling them something 10 times, they feel, not always, but they feel like they matter.
Yeah. Obviously, Brynn, I could talk to you for hours, but I'm going to ask the last question. So who is your favorite inspirational catalyst, past or present, and why?
So I thought really hard about this. I saw this question earlier, and I thought a lot about it. And it just is Taylor Swift. Like, I can't help it. It's just Taylor Swift. I never liked her music. Like, I don't even really love her music that much, honestly. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. It's snappy. But that woman inspires me so much over and over and over again. She is such a catalyst. It's unbelievable. She is constantly looking at problems in the industry, and she is standing up for her beliefs, and she is experimenting, always experimenting. I mean, I can go on and on about the things that she has done to elevate women in the industry. Her fight with Spotify, again, fighting against the grain, her republishing her music, to be like, no, you can't own me. I think the thing that stands out to me is her intelligence, her intellect. I think that she, is extremely smart and uses that to her advantage, but in a way that I think is disruptive, but also doesn't make her look like a bully, or right. Like, she has found this balance of being a catalyst, and yes, pissing off some people along the way, but eventually they come around because they know that she's for the greater good. I don't know how, and some people are going to laugh at that, but I truly believe that her purpose is above and beyond just putting out music that people enjoy. She is shifting the very business of music and women's role in it.
Amazing. Mic drop. Amen. No one has said her yet, and I'm stoked that you brought her into this conversation. So thank you, Brynn.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us. And to our listeners, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in our world, be sure to check out the book that Brynn was mentioning, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please take 10 seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send a link their way. Thanks again.